Contending with Paul, the hidden story behind the writing of Matthew, Mark, and Luke by William Joseph Cobble, page 15. When one approaches the New Testament, they will find it beginning with 4 Gospels. These works are primarily made up of narrative stories and sayings attributed to the ministry of Jesus. Next is the Acts of the Apostles, which in its first third tells the story of the 12 apostles after Jesus' ascension, and then the story of the ministry of Saul of Tarsus, Paul, in its latter 2/3. After Acts, there is a collection of letters attributed to Paul, primarily sent to churches he founded. Other works follow, but this book will focus primarily on Paul's letters, the 4 Gospels, and Acts. Because of the order of this subject matter, from the birth, ministry, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus through the post-Jesus ministries of his apostles and Paul to the Pauline correspondence, it may feel counterintuitive to imagine Paul having leveled any measure of influence upon the writing of the 4 Gospels. Jesus' crucifixion can be placed around 30 or 33 AD with some degree of confidence. Paul's experience of the risen Jesus is often dated to the mid-30s and the writing of his first extant letter to the 50s. Christian tradition places Paul's death in Rome during Nero's persecutions following the Great Fire of 64. Christian tradition holds that Peter was also martyred in Rome at this time. Before the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and its temple by the Romans in 70, the early Jesus movement had suffered additional losses as well. Acts 12, 1-5 tells of the arrest and beheading of the Apostle James, the brother of John. And the Jewish historian Josephus writes of the murder of James, the brother of Jesus, who had become the leader of the Jerusalem Mother Church after Jesus' death. The Gospel of Mark is understood by the vast majority of scholars to be the first written of the 4 Gospels. Mark is normally thought to have been composed around the time of the First Jewish War with Rome, 66 to 73. At this point in history, after losing Jesus, several leaders from Christianity's first generation, and ultimately Jerusalem and its temple, Mark may have felt it was time to compose his gospel. Therefore, even though the Gospels portray the early years of Jesus and his movement, they are understood to have been composed in this era of the second generation of believers. It is credible that Paul's influence would have been felt by all 4 gospel writers. Indeed, even though Paul had been dead for several years, it might have been impossible for them to completely insulate themselves from it. Paul's influence may be underestimated if one only counts his extant works in the New Testament. Modern Bibles attribute 13 letters to Paul, while some older Bibles attribute a 14th by assigning the epistle to the Hebrews to him as well. To ask if a mere 13 letters sent out to churches and individuals throughout the Greco-Roman world would have been enough to influence the later gospel writers is to ask the wrong question. For the benefit of using a round number, it can be estimated that Paul ministered for 30 years. Also, for the sake of a round number, the churches and individuals to whom he corresponded may be estimated to be 20. Supposing he wrote to each of these entities twice a year, Paul's total ministerial correspondence would rise from his 13 extant works to an output of 1,200. Paul would likely have been a dynamic figure in person as well. He is portrayed as a vigorous traveler and a debater in the marketplaces and synagogues that he came upon. Herein lies the influence. It should also be understood where his influence would have resided. Paul's base of power would have been outside of Judea, in many of the larger cities of the Greco-Roman world. It is here where Paul founded his churches, and it is here where his letters would have been received, preserved, and compiled. It is from this matrix that Mark, a Gentile believer, would compose the first gospel. Matthew writes his gospel sometime after 80 AD, partially in rebuttal of Mark's pro-Paul and anti-Mosaic law themes. Some years after Matthew, Luke pens his 2-volume work, the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles. As will be shown, Luke will take issue with Paul, Mark, and Matthew on several theological fronts. Continuing with Paul, the hidden story behind the writing of Matthew, Mark, and Luke by William Joseph Cobble.